Hey, how's it going, folks? This is Hellbent, and today I'm going to release a new scripting tool that I created to help me create custom windows really quickly and easily. So I've designed this to be used in conjunction with my bitmap maker. So what it does is it'll create a window, put on the graphics for that window that I want, and then it has a few other things added, including like it has a reduced GUI library, pretty much every function that I would need to draw my graphics to my GUI, and a couple other functions. So let me go ahead and set up the script. So this is the tool here. So this, I didn't spend a lot of time on making the background window, but this is the basic idea. So I have this, I create this window, this custom window that I want to use as the GUI's window rather than using it as default one. And then I want to be able to add that to a script really quickly. So it has this button, it has a couple of different sections. So it's the main part is broken up into three sections. The first one is clip new script partial, which just gives you a few functions and like move window, minimize window. If you're using the default window but you're adding your own graphics to it, then you could just ignore that. The other thing it does is just sets up single instance forest, no environment, just the basic setup, and starts GDIP. But GDIP is not in this yet, so you can either use an include to include your GDIP library, or it comes with this light version of GDIP, which has most of the like half the functions taken out. I've taken out all the comments and everything, so it's reduced it from like 4,000 lines down to like 500 lines of code. So I can add that in on its own, and I can add in the class on its own. The way that I'm going to be using it, and is probably the preferable way to do it, is just to go right for it, that I start with a brand new script and I hit clip new full script. And this is going to include the partial script that I showed, the class to create the window, and the light GDIP light library. So I'm going to hit that. Now it's in my clipboard and I paste it in. So at the very bottom it's got the GDIP light library, and it's been highlighted where it starts right there. Next up, it has the window class. This is what's going to create the window for me and add my graphics, and then what you've seen before. So now that I have that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in and create a new window. To do that, I'm just going to, I can edit these as I want, or I can edit them once I call in the function. So this is just going to give me a function call to create the new class, or create a new class. So I'm going to paste that in, and by default I have it set to add to this object called main. I can change it to whatever I want, and it calls up and creates a new instance of the custom window class. I pass it its arguments, which I'll go through in a second, and then the last thing it does is it calls up this method within it called show window. But you don't actually need this. You can just do, so for example, by default it's set to create a window GUI 1. I can just do the normal show with whatever, right? So you don't actually need this, but it's there, it's convenient, it does it for me right away. So let's go through the arguments. The first one is the X position and Y position. If I leave those blank, it'll just make my GUI pop up in the center. If I adjust any of them, it'll, go wherever I want it to go. Next is the width and the height for the window. Because this thing is going to be expecting, for the most part, a bitmap to be passed to it, or the pointer to a bitmap to be passed to it, I could technically write it into the class that it automatically checks what the size of that bitmap is and adjusts the window on its own. But, I was lazy, and all you have to do is, what's the size of your bitmap? You know the size of your bitmap. Is it 400 width, 300 height? Just fill it in. Next is the name of the window. So normally I use GUI 1 at least when I'm starting out, and then later on I might change the name. So maybe you want a GUI called settings, and that's its window name. So that would be right. I'm going to leave it as GUI 1. Next is the options that I want to have for the window. There is two options that are already used. One of the, well, it's technically just one, but I'll call it two. One is to get the handle, and the other one is to make it last found, which gets the handle. So, contained within this object that I create, there's a key that I can get, retrieve, and use the handle for the window. So main.hwnd, and that contains the handle for that window when it's created. If I want to, I can create multiple windows over and over and over again. So if I want, I can clip a new window. All I have to do is just give it the object a new name. So let's say main2, main2, and then give my GUI a new name. If I want to recreate this window somewhere else, just destroy it and create a new one. I can do that, and it will destroy the previous version of it and create the new version of it. Very easy stuff. Okay, so I need a bitmap to put in this. Like I said, this is specifically, its intention for me is to take something that I designed in my bitmap maker. If you're not familiar, it's a scripting tool that I created a week or two ago, which allows me to draw graphics. So normally if you're using GUIP, it's all function calls. So you call up a function to create a brush, you pass it a color and alpha, and then you draw a shape with it. You call up a function to draw an ellipse, you pass it you'd have to pass it the pointer to the graphics you're going to be drawing to. You pass it the pointer to the brush you're going to be using. Then you give it a width, a height, an X, a Y, etc., etc. Before you know it, just adding a couple of shapes, you're already up to 100 lines of function calls. If you get more complex, you're looking at up to 1,000 lines or more. So here's an example of a bitmap window that I created the other day, and I'll turn off auto draw so that way it does it a little bit quicker. So it's adding all these different shapes to it. So I do this all graphically, and then afterwards I export it as code so that I can use it directly in my script. It's just function calls after function calls after function calls. But here I can work in an environment where I can actually move shapes around. So for example, let me see if I can find one that's good. This one here is, if I move it to the right, which one is this? That is this one here, this line here. So I can make its height taller, minimize it, whatever. So I'm not going to save that change, I'm just going to leave that, and I'm going to clipboard this. So now I have the function that creates this in my clipboard. I'm going to come into my script here that I added. I'm going to come down probably about here. I'm going to paste it in. And this is all the code to recreate that in my script. So as you can see, it's line after line after line. First of all, you have to know how to do it. You have to know what the functions are. And then you have to know the arguments that you have to pass it. And then you're sitting here making little tweaks. Oh, do I want that to be 81? Oh, maybe. Run it. Check. 82. No. Okay. So anyways, I have this function. By default, when it spits out the function, it has a name. So this one is like 500 lines. Starts off as HB Bitmap Maker. So I can rename this if I want to, but for my purposes here, because I'm only going to be having one window, I'm just going to leave it like that. And by default, when I create this new instance of the custom window class, it's automatically going to expect me to be passing it the pointer to that bitmap. So now I just need to adjust the width and the height to make sure it lines up with the bitmap, which is 600 by 450. Like I said, I could have written it that it sizes it on its own, but whatever. 450, and now if I run it, there we go. So I've removed all the normal captioning or the normal border around the window, and I've used my own. If I want to, what I need to do now is make it so that way I can move the window around, minimize it, and close it. So by default, I have these couple of lines here commented out that do that and are attached to these different functions down here. So when I created the bitmap, I use notes. So if I come back here, what you can do is you can add notes, and then when I spit out the function, it'll leave these little comments. So now when I added in this rectangle here, I left a note saying that this is where I want to position my move window trigger. And then in this box here, I added a note that said this is where I'm going to be using minimize window, and this one's going to be where I close the window. So if I look now in my code, I can see those comments that says move control, minimize control, and close control. So I'm just going to grab this, and contained in that, I have the coordinates for those triggers. So I'm just going to separate the stuff I don't need. And there we go. Now I have the coordinates that I need. So for move window, I start at x130, y5, 340, and 40. For the minimize, it's 475. It's at x10 or y10. A width of 21 and 21. These two are going to be the same. And then 505. Okay, so now I can get rid of this. And when I run this again, now I'll have the ability to use, I can now move the window. I can now minimize the window. Where is that? And I can close the window. These things here, the GUI close, context menu, and exit, escape. These ones I just put in for testing. This is usually how, if I'm making an interface, I want to be able to run it, and I want to be able to close it really quickly. So I don't want to have to close it always up there. So what I can do instead, just by adding in the context menu, I can just right click on it and then it's closed. Once I'm done with all my testing and everything, I can just get rid of these, and I am good. So that's it. I will point out something. So if I want to take this window now, and if I want to add some text onto it, one of the things I want to do is I want to make sure that I use background transparency. So I'm going to do text, let's say, I'm just going to put it, I don't know where to put it, 400. No, let's go 420. I think that's good. Y, and I'm just going to text. I'll make sure that the color is a good enough color. Okay. I might have to do the show after that. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to move the show from there down to here. And there we go. So I have some text here. Now it just so happens that the color that I'm using for my GUI here is the same color that I made that background there. So, but if I change this to, let's say, red, now I can see that the text is showing through the window. So with text controls, I can just add in background trans, and that'll fix that. So now I can't see the background layer through it. But if I was to go to using controls like a radio button or a checkbox, the background transparency doesn't work on it. So the best way to do that is to plan when you're creating, if you're creating a custom window, to anticipate that it's not going to show any graphics. So don't put any gradients behind the checkboxes or radio buttons. Put a solid color. What you can do is you can design like an area. Let's say if I wanted to make a circular rectangle, And then inside of that I make it a solid color, so I can have all kinds of fancy things going on around it, but inside of that little area, that's where I know I'm going to put my checkbox or my radio button, and I leave its background a solid color. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. And I'll drop this down to, let's say, 30. So now I have a checkbox, but this background transparency isn't going to work anymore. So I'm going to have red. I'm going to have this red there. There's a couple of ways you can get around this. One, for what I'm going to be doing most of the time, is probably creating my own customized checkboxes and radio buttons. So this isn't going to be an issue because I can create my own controls, add them to my GUI, and I'm good. Right? The other option is you can figure out the size, the actual size of the checkbox itself, which from testing earlier, at least in my case, it was like a width of somewhere around 13 pixels and a height of around 13 pixels. And then that is just going to show the checkbox itself. And then what I can do is I can add my text to be beside that. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to do X plus, let's say, 7. And now I have a checkbox that I can use that doesn't have the problem with the background. Here, what I would end up having to do is attach both of them to a label and have them both execute the same code, and then rather than using the normal default that the checkbox can use, I can use a toggle instead, so that way I can get the same values from it. So this is another option. The other option is, rather than using the text here, when I'm designing my interface, I can add the text for it and then anticipate where I want to put this little checkbox item. Like this text here. This is all text that it was added through the editor. The last one is the last option, good option that I can think of right now, is just like I said, anticipate that it's going to be, just make sure that the color underneath it's solid. So I'm going to do Y120. So I have a solid color here for the background. It is 222. All 2s, and then I can add my text and it'll blend in perfectly. Right? So anticipate this. Same with radio buttons. Most other controls, they sit on their own thing, so that's not really going to be an issue. Like, for example, if I did a drop-down list, I'm just going to get rid of that and make it a drop-down list. Blah, 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 blah. And I'll make it whatever. I think that should be good. So with the drop-down lists or anything like that, they have their own background, so you're anticipating that you're not going to have any problems with that. Right? The ones that I can only think of off the top of my head is the radio button and the checkbox that you're going to have this issue with punching through the graphics. So just anticipate that, plan for it, and you're good. Anyways, that's it for this one. I'll leave a link to a paste for this tool here in the description. I'll also leave a link to the playlist for the Bitmap Maker if you're interested in playing around with creating your own windows. The next video I'm going to do is where I'm releasing the first button class. It's not these buttons here. I'll probably release these buttons sometime in the near future, but it's another button class, colorful buttons, that you just pretty much copy and paste some code in and you're good. You got buttons that work and everything. Anyways, that's it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and have a good evening. Peace.